Imagine an old house steeped in the quiet hum of forgotten years. Inside, dust motes dance in the pale light. Silence has become a permanent resident. A silence that was about to be broken. In the dim corner, an old telephone gathers dust, utterly dead. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, precisely at 3:33 p.m., the silence was shattered. A shrill, insistent ring. A sound that simply should not be. Against all logic, the receiver was lifted. And from the other end, a voice. The blue jay will fall before the rain. And then click. Silence returned. But the seed of unease had been planted. And it was about to grow. The following Tuesday, the clock hands crept towards that same dreaded time, 3:33 p.m. Would it happen again? Or was it a one-time anomaly, a story to be told and then forgotten? The air crackled with a nervous energy. And then, it happened. The disconnected phone. It rang, that same jarring, impossible sound. This was no coincidence. This was a pattern. A terrifying, inexplicable pattern. The calls were always brief. The voice always that same unsettling monotone. Each week a new message delivered with chilling precision. The advice, if you could call it that, was always cryptic, always short, but it was always right. The milk will sour by morning. And it did, despite being fresh. Don't take the Elm Street shortcut. A news report later spoke of a sudden sinkhole there. Small things at first, almost trivial, yet the accuracy was unnerving. How could anyone know these things, these tiny, insignificant future events? It was as if the caller was watching, not just watching the house, but watching tomorrow itself. The knowledge was too specific, too timely, too impossible. Fear began to take root, a cold dread spreading through the household. This wasn't some harmless prank, this wasn't a faulty wire or a crossed line, this was something else entirely, something beyond understanding. Attempts to trace the call, of course, were futile. How do you trace a call to a phone that isn't even connected? The authorities would laugh, friends would think you mad. So, the secret was kept, a horrifying shared secret, bound by the weekly ritual of that single, chilling ring. The mystery deepened with every passing week. Who was this caller? Or perhaps, what was this caller? And why this house? Why this ancient, lifeless telephone? The questions swirled, a vortex of fear and confusion. Each ring was a reminder of their helplessness, each accurate prediction a testament to the caller's unearthly power. The phone, once a forgotten piece of junk, now held a terrifying significance. It was a portal, a whisper from a place no one understood, a call from tomorrow. And the messages were slowly, subtly, beginning to change. The stakes, it seemed, were getting higher. The week after the first impossible call felt like an eternity. Every creak, every whisper seemed sinister. The blue jay had met an untimely end. Coincidence? Tuesday loomed. Would the phone ring again? As 3:30 p.m. approached, the air grew thick. Eyes were drawn to the silent, dusty telephone. Then, at 3:33 p.m., it happened. The shrill scream of the disconnected telephone. The receiver was lifted. The voice echoed. The kitchen light will flicker, then fail. A pause, then the click. The kitchen light? They waited, staring at the kitchen fixture, dread dawning. The kitchen light began to flicker. It cast unsettling shadows. Then, darkness. Another prediction fulfilled. Impossible knowledge delivered. The following Tuesday, the scene replayed. The same agonizing wait. The same heart-stopping ring. The same chilling voice. A letter with no stamp will arrive. It arrived the next morning, an unstamped envelope with a simple word inside. Soon. A pattern was emerging. A terrifying rhythm. The phone now held a place of dark reverence, or perhaps to something far more sinister. The true horror of these early calls lay not in dramatic pronouncements of disaster, but in their unsettling intimacy with the mundane. The caller knew the small things, the insignificant details of life that were about to unfold. The coffee will be bitter. And it was, despite being made with the usual care, an acrid taste that lingered like a bad omen. A lost button will be found under the rug. And there it was, discovered during a routine vacuuming, a small, forgotten disc suddenly imbued with a strange significance. These were not global events, but tiny, personal futures revealed. This specificity was what made the calls so deeply unnerving. It wasn't like reading a horoscope, vague and open to interpretation. These were concrete, verifiable facts. Facts delivered before they happened. It suggested a knowledge that was almost omniscient, yet focused on the trivial. Why? What was the purpose of revealing that the toast would burn, or that a specific television show would be interrupted by a news bulletin? It felt like a game, a cruel, inexplicable game played by an unseen entity with access to the script of their lives. The initial shock began to morph into a strange, fearful dependency. Disbelief had long since evaporated, replaced by a grudging, terrified acceptance. The family found themselves listening, truly listening to these cryptic warnings. They started to almost expect them, to prepare for them. If the phone said the milk would sour, they bought a new carton even if the old one seemed fine. They were subtle alterations of behavior, small surrenders to the authority of that disembodied voice. The phone was no longer just an object, it was an oracle. Of course they tried to understand. In the quiet hours between the calls, they examined the phone again and again. Was there a hidden transmitter, some elaborate high-tech prank? But the house was old, the phone ancient. There were no new wires, no strange devices. They even, in a moment of desperate hope, had a friend, an engineer, take a discreet look. He found nothing, just a dead phone. A beautifully preserved, utterly inert piece of plastic and metal. The explanation, it seemed, did not lie in the realm of the rational. Living with these weekly pronouncements became a heavy burden. Even though the predictions were often minor, the foreknowledge itself was a weight. Do you try to prevent it? If the voice said, "The vase on the mantelpiece will fall," did you move the vase? Or did you let fate unfold? It seemed intervention was futile. The outcomes were set. This realization brought a new layer of helplessness. They were merely spectators to their own micro-fates, pre-warned, but powerless. The warnings started to carry a slightly darker undertone. These weren't events that could be easily verified. These were designed to unsettle, to fray the nerves. The game was changing. Each Tuesday the phone rang, always at 3:33 p.m., always disconnected, always impossible. The family tore apart the phone, checked every wire, every inch, nothing. No tricks, no batteries, no explanation. Yet the voice kept coming flat, sexless, eerily precise. The predictions were never wrong, always unsettling. Was it a prank? A crossed wire? Every theory collapsed under scrutiny. The phone was a relic, but it spoke the future. Their search for logic only deepened the mystery. The enigma grew, feeding on their confusion and fear, and every week the dread grew stronger, waiting for the next call. Desperate for answers, they turned to the internet. Forums, articles, ghost stories, nothing matched their experience. No one else had a dead phone that predicted the future. Psychics and ghost hunters were considered, but fear of the unknown and of being believed kept them silent. Every search led to more questions, more isolation. The phone wasn't just haunted, it was intelligent, active, calculating. They were alone, adrift in a sea of digital noise. The only certainty, the next call was coming. Tuesdays became a countdown to terror. The family lived in the shadow of the next prophecy, every routine warped by anticipation. Even trivial predictions, late mail, a broken dish, ruled their days. Sleep was scarce, paranoia flourished. The house felt less like home, more like a trap. Conversations grew tense, silences heavier. They were bound together by fear, yet isolated by it. Life's rhythm was dictated by the phantom caller. Normalcy faded, replaced by dread. The calls changed, more personal, more invasive. Lost keys, fallen photos, small details that cut deep. The voice seemed to know their lives intimately. Each message felt like a test, a threat. The sense of being watched intensified. Logic failed. Fear took over. The abyss stared back and the family teetered on its edge. What would the next call bring? The warnings grew darker. A branch over the swing set would crack. A stranger would linger at the gate. The predictions now hinted at real danger, not just inconvenience. The voice's reach expanded. Ambulances, neighbors, events beyond their walls. Anxiety became constant, the house suffocating. The mystery was no longer quaint. It was menacing. Each call painted a darker future. The family was trapped, nerves frayed, hope fading. The shadow of the unknown stretched further every week. Fear was now their only companion. Then one Tuesday, the call changed everything. The message: the basement stairs, unseen, unsafe, before the midnight bell. This was no riddle. This was a warning. The basement, once mundane, now radiated menace. Panic set in. The threat was real, immediate. Every creak, every shadow became a potential disaster. The family huddled, terrified, forced to act. Was this protection or a new game? The deadline was clear. Midnight. The clock ticked, their safety in question. The phone's power was no longer abstract. The basement awaited, and so did the unknown. The warning was specific. Unseen, unsafe. What if something on or under the stairs could affect the house itself? With trembling hands they decided to investigate. Two of them cautiously opened the basement door. Slowly, carefully they began their descent, flashlights cutting beams through the gloom. Unseen, the voice had said. What were they missing? One of them checked underneath the staircase. They saw it. A dark, oily patch seeping from an old can of solvent above the furnace's pilot light. Relief warred with terror. It would have been a flash fire, an explosion. They had found it with hours to spare. They had averted disaster, thanks to a call from a dead phone. The immediate aftermath was a strange cocktail of emotions. They had stared into the abyss and been pulled back. Gratitude mingled with the relief, gratitude towards a faceless voice from a disconnected telephone. The relief was overshadowed by dread. It had demonstrated the ability to warn against life-threatening danger. If it could save them, what else could it do? The phone was a conduit to life-or-death information. It intensified their fear and dependency. They were active participants in a terrifying dance with fate, whose motives remained utterly opaque. It was both their tormentor and their savior. This was real. Deadly real. The week following the basement incident was honestly unlike any before. The silence in the house was no longer just heavy, it was suffocating. Each tick of the clock seemed to mock them, a countdown to what? Another near disaster? Another miraculous, terrifying salvation? The phone, their silent tormentor, their improbable guardian, now sat with an aura of almost unbearable power. It had saved them. It had proven its capacity to foresee true danger, life-altering danger. This knowledge did not bring comfort. Instead, it brought a new, sharper kind of fear, a fear born of absolute dependence. They found themselves listening, not just for the ring, but to the silence itself. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind felt like a precursor. A whisper, a warning the phone might soon articulate. Normal life had become a fragile veneer, stretched thin over a chasm of anxiety. Sleep offered little escape, dreams haunted by ringing phones and cryptic voices, by shadows in basements and the smell of unseen hazards. They moved through their days like ghosts in their own home, their thoughts tethered to that one object, that one impending moment. The previous calls, the ones predicting burnt toast or a late mail delivery, seemed almost like child's play now. Quaint, even. The stakes had been raised to an unimaginable level. The caller knew things that could kill, things that could save. This transformation of the phone from a bizarre oddity to a critical lifeline was terrifying. They were no longer just curious or frightened. They were utterly, hopelessly reliant on this weekly whisper from the unknown. The thought of it not ringing or them missing its message was now unthinkable, and so they waited. The silence between that last life-saving call and the next appointment with dread stretched taut. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions. Why them? Why this house? Why these warnings that swung from the mundane to the critically urgent? The silence was the canvas upon which their darkest fears painted vivid scenarios. The silence was the pause between screams, a breath held too long, anticipating the next inevitable plunge into the terrifying unknown. The weight of what the next call might bring was almost unbearable. Tuesday arrived, a day etched in their minds not by the calendar, but by the dread it carried. The morning crawled by, each minute an eternity. The air in the study grew thick, charged, almost vibrating with anticipation. By 3:30 p.m., the family had gathered, drawn by an invisible thread of shared terror and grim necessity. No one spoke. Eyes darted between the grandfather clock and the dusty, silent telephone. It sat there, impassive, holding their future in its Bakelite heart. Would it warn of another hidden danger, another crisis to be narrowly averted? Then, the exact moment, 3:33 p.m. The shrill metallic cry of the disconnected phone ripped through the oppressive stillness. It was a sound they knew too well, yet it never failed to jolt them, to send ice water through their veins. Hands trembled, a breath was collectively held. The receiver, cold and heavy like a stone, was lifted. The familiar, unsettling silence on the line for a fraction of a second. Then, the voice. That same sexless, chillingly calm voice. But this time the message was different. Utterly, terrifyingly different. It was not a prediction. It was a command. Don't pick up next time, just 5 words. 5 simple words that landed like a death sentence. There was no explanation, no context, no hint of what might happen if they disobeyed, or indeed, if they obeyed. Just the flat, emotionless directive. Then the familiar click, the line went dead. Silence rushed back in, but it was a new kind of silence. A silence more profound, more horrifying than any they had experienced before. The silence of an ultimatum. The silence of an abandoned lifeline. The silence of utter, absolute dread. The receiver was slowly, numbly, placed back on its cradle. The family stared at each other, faces ashen. Don't pick up next time. The words echoed in the small room, seeming to bounce off the walls to seep into the very fabric of the house. What did it mean? After saving them, after becoming their sole source of impossible, life-saving insight. Why this? Was it a test, a threat, or something far more sinister, something beyond their wildest, most terrified imaginings? The caller had spoken, and its words had plunged them into a new, deeper level of terror. The immediate aftermath of that fateful call was chaos. Not a loud chaos, but a quiet, internal explosion of fear and disbelief. "Don't pick up next time." The sentence replayed itself in their minds like over and over, a broken record of dread. Why? The question hung heavy, totally unanswerable. This wasn't a warning about, a falling branch or a faulty appliance. This was about the phone itself, about their only connection to the foresight that had, just days ago, saved them from a fiery end. To be told to sever that connection felt like a cruel betrayal. The implications were staggering, a Gordian knot of terror. If they didn't pick up, what then? Would a disaster strike, unwarned, unheeded? Had the caller foreseen something so terrible that it wanted to spare them the knowledge, or perhaps ensure their demise by withholding the crucial warning? Or was the act of not picking up the key to avoiding some even greater peril? The paradox was a torment. Their savior was now telling them to reject salvation. It made no sense. It was a new, exquisitely crafted form of psychological torture. The fear of missing a warning, a life-saving piece of information, was now pitted against the fear of disobeying this new, direct command. What if this was the ultimate test? What if ignoring this instruction brought about a consequence far worse than any physical danger the phone had previously predicted? The caller had demonstrated its power over future events. Now, it seemed to be demonstrating its power over them, directly. The thought that they were being manipulated, controlled by this unseen, unknown entity, was a chilling realization that went beyond mere fright. They were trapped. If they picked up, they defied the caller. If they didn't, they risked missing a crucial warning. The phone, once a source of terrifying clarity, had now become a symbol of agonizing ambiguity. Its silence for the next week would not be a silence of anticipation, but a silence of impossible decision. The choice was stark: listen, and potentially face the caller's wrath, or obey and potentially face the wrath of an unwarned fate. Neither option offered solace, neither offered escape, only varying shades of terror. The days that followed were filled with, hushed, frantic discussions. Arguments born of fear and desperation. Should they remove the phone, smash it? But the thought of destroying their only link, however compromised, was terrifying. What if that act itself triggered something? The caller's words, "Don't pick up next time," were not a suggestion. They carried the undeniable weight of an order, an ultimatum from a power that had proven itself to be profoundly knowledgeable, and perhaps infinitely dangerous. The command was simple, yet its implications were a labyrinth. This was a fundamental shift in the dynamic. Before, the calls were about external events. The family were observers, albeit terrified ones, of prophecies unfolding. Now the prophecy was about their interaction with the source. The caller was no longer just a predictor, it was a director. It was dictating their behavior, pulling their strings in a new, more intimate way. This level of control felt more invasive, more personal than any previous message. The sense of being a pawn in some cosmic, malevolent game intensified tenfold. The weight of the word "don't" was immense. It wasn't a prediction of what would happen, but an instruction of what not to do. This implied consequence. It implied that picking up the phone next time would be a transgression. But what would be the price of that transgression? And what would be the price of obedience? The family dissected the 5 words endlessly, searching for hidden meanings, for loopholes, for any shred of guidance. But the message remained stark, absolute, and utterly terrifying in its simplicity. As the next Tuesday crept closer, the tension in the house became a palpable entity, a living, breathing dread that followed them from room to room. The phone sat in the study, a silent sphinx posing an impossible riddle. To pick up or not to pick up? That was the question. And the answer, they knew, could mean the difference between an unknown future and an unimaginable consequence. The echo of the caller's ultimatum resonated in every tick of the clock, a chilling prelude to a choice that could seal their fate. The command, "Don't pick up next time," echoed like a funeral dirge. The week crawled towards an unknown fate. Sleep was a battlefield of nightmares. The house seemed to hold its breath, every shadow a portent of doom. It was about obedience or defiance, their existence hanging in the balance. Desperate debates raged. Some argued the caller knew best and they had to obey. Others argued for defiance. Was this command a trick? The caller had toyed with them, controlled them, then ordered them to sever that dependency. The countdown to Tuesday was a march towards an impossible choice. The phone was a focal point of dread. The family found themselves isolated, wrestling with the weight of what was to come. The choice felt like an ending. Tuesday arrived, cloaked in dread. The house was a mausoleum of unspoken fears. Each family member moved like a phantom, faces pale, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. The cursed telephone resided in the study, the epicenter of their impending doom. No one dared approach it. As the clock crawled towards 3:30 p.m., the tension became a physical presence. Then it happened. 3:33 p.m., the precise, dreaded moment, and the phone rang. That shrill, familiar scream cut through the silence. Once, twice, every instinct screamed at them to answer, but the caller's voice echoed, "Don't pick up next time." They did not answer. Then abruptly, silence. In the aftermath of the unanswered call, an eerie stillness descended. The silence was a heavy, watchful, expectant presence. The family sat frozen, listening to their hearts. Minutes bled into an hour. The absence of the weekly prophecy left them adrift in uncertainty. The days that followed were a tense, hyper-vigilant waiting game. Was this the unwarned danger they had chosen? Events that once were mundane now seemed sinister. The disconnected telephone sat in the study, a silent monument. Did the caller give up? Was the command its final act? The questions remained, unanswered. The family was changed, scarred by the calls. The calls may have stopped, but the mystery endured. The silence from the phone was now the loudest sound.